Wild Mustangs discovered a forest ranger tied to a tree in the remote wilderness, abandoned and left to die. What these majestic creatures did next defied everything we thought we knew about animal compassion. Get ready for a story that will shake your understanding of these magnificent animals and leave you with tears streaming down your face. The scorching August sun beat down mercilessly on the Nevada wilderness. Miles from the nearest road, in a forgotten corner of the Silver Creek Conservation Area, Senior Ranger Michael Cooper fought against the ropes cutting into his wrists. 30 hours had passed since the poachers had left him here, bound tightly to an ancient juniper, his radio smashed, his water emptied onto the parched earth before his eyes. At 45, Cooper was no stranger to the dangers of his profession. For 12 years, he'd patrolled these protected lands, deterring poachers and safeguarding the wildlife that called this harsh landscape home. The wild Mustangs were his particular passion, majestic symbols of American freedom that faced increasing threats from those who saw them as either nuisances or profit opportunities. You'll have plenty of time to think about why you shouldn't interfere with a man's livelihood. The leader of the poaching ring had snarled as he tightened the final knot. By the time anyone notices you're missing, the only company you'll have will be the vultures. Now, as the second day of his abandonment wore on, Cooper's situation had grown desperate. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his tongue swollen from dehydration. The periodic tugging at his restraints had rubbed his wrists raw. Worst of all was the knowledge that his emergency beacon lay in pieces at his feet, ensuring the search teams would have no signal to guide them to his location. Cooper had shouted until his voice gave out sometime during the first night. Now, he conserved what little strength remained, fighting against the overwhelming urge to close his eyes. Sleep meant death out here. A slow, agonizing death beneath the unforgiving desert sun. A faint drumming sound pulled Cooper back from the edge of unconsciousness. At first, he attributed it to the pounding in his dehydrated head, but as the sound grew louder, recognition dawned. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast across the rocky terrain. Through swollen eyes, Cooper watched as a band of wild Mustangs crested the ridge ahead. The herd moved as one fluid entity, around 15 horses, led by a magnificent black stallion with a single white sock on his right foreleg. Cooper had seen this herd before during his patrols and had nicknamed their leader Midnight in his field reports. Under normal circumstances, the horses would have given wide berth to any human presence, but Cooper's immobile state and the days without washing had perhaps diminished the human scent that would typically warn them away. Instead of veering off, the herd slowed its pace, the leader raising his head to test the air. "Go on," Cooper whispered through parched lips. "Nothing to see here." To his astonishment, Midnight took a cautious step forward, then another. The stallion's ears flicked forward with interest rather than pinning back in fear. Behind him, a dun-colored mare and several younger horses followed cautiously, forming a loose semicircle about 30 yards from where Cooper was bound. Cooper remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as the majestic creatures regarded him with unmistakable curiosity. In all his years in the wilderness, he'd never been this close to a wild herd without the barrier of a vehicle between them. Then something even more extraordinary happened. Midnight approached even closer, lowering his great head to sniff at Cooper's boots. The ranger could see the individual whiskers around the stallion's velvety muzzle, the intelligent gleam in his dark eyes. "I don't suppose you know how to untie knots," Cooper murmured. What the stallion did next would be the first in a series of events that would challenge everything Cooper thought he knew about these magnificent animals and their capacity for understanding. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, casting long shadows across the scrubland, Midnight maintained his unexpected vigil near Ranger Cooper. The rest of the herd had spread out to graze on the sparse vegetation, but they remained unusually close, their normal wariness seemingly suspended. Cooper drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening bringing the disorienting surprise of finding the Mustang still nearby. By his estimate, He had perhaps one more day before dehydration would claim his life. Search teams would be looking by now, but the conservation area spanned over 400,000 acres of rugged wilderness. Without a signal to guide them, finding him would be nearly impossible. During one of his lucid moments, Cooper became aware of a change in the stallion's behavior. Midnight had moved away and was pawing at the ground about 50 yards distant, his powerful foreleg digging with purpose. The behavior was not unusual in itself. Horses often pawed to check for water or to express impatience, but the intensity and focus were striking. "What have you found, boy?" Cooper whispered, his voice a raspy shadow of its normal tone. After several minutes of determined digging, the stallion's actions created a small depression in the earth. He lowered his muzzle to the freshly exposed soil, then raised his head abruptly, his ears pricked forward. To Cooper's astonishment, a tiny pool of water began to form in the depression. An underground spring revealed by the horse's instinctive knowledge of the land. Midnight drank deeply, then stepped back. Several other horses approached to take their turn. Under normal circumstances, Cooper would have been fascinated by this display of wild behavior, but now it was torture to watch the life-giving water so close yet unreachable. The dun mare, heavily pregnant and moving with the careful grace of an expectant mother, broke away from the spring after drinking. To Cooper's shock, she approached him directly, water still dripping from her muzzle. She stopped just beyond reach, regarding him with liquid brown eyes that seemed to hold an ancient wisdom. "Easy, Mama," Cooper murmured, using the gentle tone that had always served him well with frightened animals. The mare stretched her neck toward him, her nostrils flaring as she scented him. Then in a movement so deliberate, it could not be mistaken, she lowered her muzzle to his face. Cooper felt the strange intimacy of her warm breath, then something even more unexpected. Moisture from her muzzle transferring to his parched lips. Cooper's mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. The mare had brought him water, not much, just the few drops clinging to her whiskers and lips after drinking, but she had unmistakably delivered it to him with purpose. "Thank you," he whispered, the moisture barely enough to tantalize his cracked lips. The mare backed away, returning to the herd, but the interaction seemed to trigger something in the group dynamics. Midnight approached the spring again, drinking deeply. Then, to Cooper's continued amazement, the stallion approached and repeated the mare's action, offering precious drops of water from his muzzle to the ranger's parched lips. One by one, several members of the herd performed this same ritual. None could bring much water, but collectively, they provided just enough moisture to ease the most agonizing edge of Cooper's thirst. It wasn't enough to save him, but it bought him precious hours. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, the blessing and curse of the desert. Cooper shivered against the trunk of the juniper, his body's depleted resources providing little protection against the cold. The herd had settled nearby, an unprecedented behavior that defied everything Cooper knew about wild Mustang patterns. In the pale moonlight, Cooper watched as the herd shifted position. The pregnant dun mare rose from where she had been resting and, with slow, deliberate steps, approached Cooper again. To his utter disbelief, she lowered her substantial body to the ground beside him, pressing her warm flank against his side. Within minutes, 2 younger horses joined her, creating a protective circle of warm bodies around the ranger. Tears sprang to Cooper's eyes as he realized what was happening. These wild creatures, following some mysterious instinct or intelligence he couldn't begin to comprehend, were sharing their body heat to keep him alive through the cold desert night. "Why are you helping me?" Cooper whispered into the mare's mane, knowing he would never understand the answer. As he drifted into the most comfortable sleep he'd had since his ordeal began, Cooper couldn't know that the greatest miracle, and his only real chance at survival, would come with the dawn. First light broke over the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold. Cooper awakened to find the horses still surrounding him, their warm bodies having protected him from the worst of the night's chill. The dun mare rose slowly to her feet, shaking dust from her coat before moving off to graze. The other horses followed, stretching and nickering softly to one another in the quiet morning. Cooper's situation remained dire. The small amount of moisture the horses had provided had been enough to prevent immediate death, but dehydration was advancing relentlessly. His vision blurred at the edges, and the pounding in his head had intensified. Without water and medical attention soon, he wouldn't survive another day. Midnight, who had maintained a watchful position throughout the night, suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward in alert attention. The stallion issued a low, rumbling sound that caused the entire herd to pause their grazing and look toward him. Cooper had witnessed herd communication before, but never anything this deliberate or immediate in response. The black stallion trotted to the highest point of the nearby ridge, his powerful body silhouetted against the morning sky. He gazed intently into the distance, then issued a high, piercing whinny that echoed across the landscape. He repeated this call 3 times before returning to where Cooper was bound. To the ranger's astonishment, the stallion began nudging and pulling at the ropes that secured him to the tree. Though unable to untie the complex knots, the horse's efforts succeeded in loosening some of the bindings slightly, providing minimal relief to Cooper's raw wrists. "Good try, boy," Cooper murmured, "but I need human hands for this one." What happened next defied explanation. Midnight trotted back to the herd and engaged in what could only be described as a conference with several other horses. There was an exchange of soft nickering, head movements, and subtle body language that Cooper, even with his years of observing wild horses, had never witnessed with such complexity. Following this exchange, Midnight and 2 young stallions separated from the main herd. With a final glance back at Cooper, the 3 horses departed at a swift gallop, disappearing over the western ridge in the direction of the nearest ranger station, nearly 15 miles distant. Cooper watched them go with mixed emotions. Part of him mourned the departure of the magnificent stallion who had shown such unexpected concern. Another part recognized that wild horses needed to roam freely, not stay with a dying human. The remaining herd members continued their unusually close proximity, with the pregnant Dun Mary occasionally approaching to check on him. Hours passed under the intensifying sun. Cooper's condition deteriorated as dehydration advanced. He drifted between consciousness and a dreamlike state where the boundaries between reality and hallucination blurred. During one such moment, he thought he heard distant radio static and human voices calling his name, but he dismissed it as his dying brain manufacturing hope. It wasn't until a familiar whinny cut through his haze that Cooper forced his eyes open once more. There, cresting the eastern ridge, was a sight he could scarcely comprehend. Midnight had returned, his black coat lathered with sweat from hard running. Behind him came 2 Park Service vehicles bouncing over the rough terrain at dangerous speeds. "Cooper!" The voice of Chris Martinez, his fellow ranger and closest friend, carried across the distance. "My God, we found you!" As the vehicles skidded to a halt and rangers spilled out with medical kits and water, Cooper's gaze remained fixed on Midnight. The stallion stood at a safe distance now that humans had arrived, watching the rescue unfold with those same intelligent eyes. "How did you find me?" Cooper asked as Chris cut through his bindings and helped him take his first sips of water. "You're not going to believe this," Chris replied, glancing at the Mustangs now regrouping at a cautious distance. 3 horses, a black stallion, and 2 younger ones, came right up to the station fence. They were making the biggest racket you ever heard, carrying on something fierce. When we came out, they'd run off a little way, then stop and look back like they wanted us to follow. Johnson thought I was crazy, but I swear they were leading us somewhere. Cooper's eyes met Midnight's across the distance. "I believe you," he said softly. As the medical team worked to stabilize him for transport, Cooper heard Chris radio back to the station. "We've got him. Dehydrated and roughed up, but alive. And Johnson, you're going to want to rethink everything you thought you knew about those Mustangs." 2 months after his rescue, Michael Cooper stood on the observation platform at Silver Creek Conservation Area. Though his physical wounds had healed, the experience had transformed him deeply. The poachers who left him to die had been arrested, but Cooper's focus remained on the extraordinary animals that saved his life. "You sure about this?" Chris Martinez asked, binoculars in hand. "Nobody would blame you for taking a desk assignment after what happened." Cooper shook his head. "I need to see them." His story had captured national attention. Skeptics dismissed his account of the Mustang's help as hallucinations, but Cooper knew what he had experienced. "There they are," Chris said, pointing toward the northern ridge. "Midnight's herd." Cooper raised his binoculars, heart racing as he spotted the black stallion leading his family across the terrain. He counted 14 horses, but noticed one missing. "The dun mare," Cooper said. "I don't see her." Chris shifted uncomfortably. "One of the volunteers spotted a dun mare separated from the herd last week. She appeared to be having trouble with a new foal." Without hesitation, Cooper turned toward his vehicle. "Where?" "Near Juniper Canyon, about 12 miles northwest. But she rejoined the herd the next day." "I need to be sure," Cooper said, already loading his gear. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Cooper reached a hidden valley. A soft nickering sound drew his attention to a protected hollow. There stood the dun mare with a small foal bearing a distinctive white blaze similar to the scar Cooper himself had from childhood. Cooper approached slowly, expecting them to flee. Instead, the mare regarded him with recognition, ears pricked forward in greeting. "Hello, old friend," Cooper said softly. The mare nudged her foal to its feet, revealing the problem. One leg was noticeably weaker than the others, causing the young horse to struggle with movement. Cooper's heart ached at the sight. In the wild, such weakness often meant death. Yet this mare had stayed, protecting her vulnerable offspring. Cooper removed a specialized veterinary supplement from his pack, a nutrient-rich paste designed to strengthen bones and muscles in young horses. "I'd like to help," he said, holding out his hand. In a display of extraordinary trust, the mare approached without fear, allowed Cooper to stroke her neck, then stepped aside, creating a path to her foal. Cooper gently examined the weakened leg and applied a small brace he fashioned from materials in his pack. "I'll come back with better supplies tomorrow," he promised. Before leaving, Cooper placed a small GPS tracking device within a loose collar around the foal's neck to help him locate them again. As he backed away, the sound of galloping hooves approached. Midnight and the herd appeared on the ridge, having come searching for their missing members. Instead of displaying aggression, Midnight approached cautiously, exchanged soft nickers with the mare, then turned his gaze to Cooper. After a long moment, the stallion lowered his head in acknowledgement before leading his family away. Cooper watched them go, understanding that something unprecedented had formed between them, a connection that transcended natural boundaries, forged in mutual respect and assistance. The conference room at the Department of Interior fell silent as Michael Cooper concluded his presentation. 6 months after his ordeal, he had launched a formal study of what scientists now called advanced pro-social behavior in the Silver Creek Mustang herd. "The evidence is incontrovertible," Cooper stated, gesturing to the data behind him. "We've documented 47 distinct instances of complex problem-solving, intentional communication with humans, and teaching patterns within the herd that challenge everything we thought we knew about equine cognition." The audience included Bureau of Land Management officials, conservation experts, and congressional staffers. The stakes were enormous. A proposed reduction in protected lands and increased roundups threatened thousands of Mustangs. "Ranger Cooper," the BLM director said, "while your personal story is compelling, anecdotal evidence isn't scientific proof. Managing these herds costs taxpayers millions annually." Cooper nodded to Dr. Eleanor Wright, the animal cognition specialist who had joined his team. "That's why we implemented rigorous observational protocols," Dr. Wright explained, advancing to a slide showing a complex sociogram of herd interactions. "What we're seeing represents a statistically significant deviation from established Mustang behavior patterns. The herd not only tolerates close human observation, but actively engages in intentional communication. These animals aren't just resources, Cooper added. They're intelligent beings adapting to a changing world. Our policies must adapt too. What exactly are you proposing? The director asked. A 3-year moratorium on herd reductions, non-invasive tracking instead of roundups, and expansion of protected territories based on our migration data. As skeptical murmurs filled the room, Cooper's phone buzzed with an alert. He quickly connected it to the presentation system. Before you dismiss our proposals, watch this footage captured 30 minutes ago. The video showed Midnight's herd encountering an injured hiker on a remote trail. Rather than fleeing, the horses approached cautiously. Midnight and Sage positioned themselves protectively, while 2 younger horses galloped to the research station, clearly seeking attention. The footage showed the team following these horses directly to the injured man, who was safely evacuated. This isn't isolated, Cooper said. This is the 3rd time in 2 months they've sought help for an injured person. We have 7 cases of them alerting us to injured wildlife as well. The room remained silent, processing the implications. Senator Morrison's aide spoke first. My boss would be interested in seeing your research firsthand. I'd be honored to host the senator, Cooper replied. As the meeting ended, officials who had opposed Cooper's proposals now approached with questions. The tide was turning. Dr. Wright squeezed Cooper's arm. When you first contacted me, I thought you might be suffering from post-traumatic delusions. And now? Now I think we're rewriting textbooks on animal cognition, she replied, and saving these magnificent animals from outdated policies. Cooper's phone buzzed with a message from Chris. Midnight's waiting at the observation point. I swear he knows you're coming back today. Cooper looked at the DC skyline, then at his plane ticket to Nevada. The real work, building a bridge between species, awaited him in the wilderness where he'd nearly died. And somehow he knew Midnight would be watching for his return. 1 year after his rescue, Michael Cooper stood in a secluded valley the research team called the Sanctuary. What began as a simple field study had evolved into something revolutionary. A protected zone where the extraordinary relationship between the Silver Creek Mustangs and human researchers could develop naturally. Morning mist clung to the ground as Cooper surveyed the scene. Several members of Midnight's herd grazed peacefully nearby, including Sage and her year-old colt, Spirit, whose once weak leg had strengthened to near-normal function. The young horse bore the distinctive white blaze that mirrored Cooper's own scar. They're early today, Dr. Wright commented, joining Cooper on their observation platform. They must know it's a special occasion. Cooper nodded. They always seem to know. Today marked the official opening of the Silver Creek Wild Horse Cognitive Research Center, a facility dedicated to understanding and protecting the remarkable herd that saved Cooper's life. His seemingly fantastical story had developed into a groundbreaking scientific initiative with university partnerships and new federal funding. Senator Morrison's motorcade just passed the main gate, Dr. Wright said, checking her phone. Cooper acknowledged this but remained focused on Midnight, who stood alert on a distant ridge, his powerful form silhouetted against the morning sky. The stallion had maintained his role as both leader and liaison between the herd and researchers. I'm going to check on the new foals, Cooper said, walking toward the eastern end where several mares with young offspring had established a nursery area. This was perhaps their most extraordinary discovery, wild mares allowing human observation of their newborn foals at close range, defying everything previously documented about wild horse protective instincts. As Cooper approached, speaking softly, the mares regarded him calmly. One young mother named Aurora actually stepped aside, creating a clear view of her week-old foal. The herd's behavior had sparked intense scientific debate. Some researchers attributed it to classical conditioning. The horses associated humans with positive experiences. Dr. Wright and Cooper believed something deeper was happening, genuine trust and collaborative intention. A soft nicker drew Cooper's attention back to the ridge. Midnight was making his way down, moving with purposeful strides. As the stallion reached him, Cooper remained still, meeting the horse's gaze with quiet respect. Midnight extended his muzzle, breathing gently against Cooper's palm in their customary greeting. "They're coming today," Cooper said softly. "The people who can help protect your family." Midnight tossed his head before surveying the valley, his ears pricking forward at the distant sound of vehicles approaching. He remained beside Cooper briefly before trotting toward the main herd. Within minutes, the horses had arranged themselves in their reception formation. A loose semicircle with Midnight and Sage at the center. Young horses protected behind. 20 minutes later, Senator Morrison stood speechless, watching the herd maintain position 50 yards away. "In 30 years of wildlife policy, I've never seen anything like this," the Interior Secretary whispered. "They're actually watching us." "Not just watching," Cooper replied. "Evaluating, deciding how much to reveal." As the discussion continued, Midnight broke from formation and approached. The officials fell silent, watching in awe, as the stallion stopped 20 feet away, his gaze moving from one person to the next, before settling on Senator Morrison. Then he lowered his head in a gesture of acknowledgement. "What is he doing?" the senator whispered, visibly moved. "I believe," Cooper said, "he's thanking you for coming to see for yourself." As Midnight returned to his family, Cooper saw tears in the senator's eyes. Sometimes, he reflected, the simple dignity of a wild creature, reaching across the ancient divide between species, spoke more eloquently than any human advocate ever could. 5 years after being left to die in the wilderness, Michael Cooper stood on the observation tower at the heart of the Silver Creek Wild Horse Sanctuary. The facility had grown from a modest research outpost to an internationally renowned center for wild horse conservation, attracting scientists and visitors from around the world. Spring sunshine warmed Cooper's face as he surveyed the protected valley below, where nearly 30 Mustangs from Midnight's expanded herd grazed peacefully. The program had exceeded even his most optimistic hopes. Congress had passed the Wild Horse Protection Act, establishing new standards for conservation based directly on the Silver Creek research. Spirit, now a strong young stallion with no trace of his early disability, galloped playfully alongside his mother. The distinctive white blaze on his face caught the sunlight as he moved with the grace his name suggested. "The school buses are arriving," Dr. Wright said, joining Cooper on the platform. After 5 years as research partners, they had recently become engaged, their shared passion for the horses having blossomed into something deeper. "How many today?" Cooper asked. 4 buses, about 100 kids," she replied. "The education program is booked solid for the next 6 months." This was perhaps the most meaningful achievement of all. Thousands of children learning about the extraordinary intelligence and emotional capacity of these magnificent animals, each visitor left as a potential advocate for conservation. Cooper spotted Midnight on the far ridge, his black coat showing touches of gray now, but his bearing still regal. The stallion had become an ambassador between species, his story changing how people viewed wild animals across the country. "There he is," Cooper said, pointing. As if hearing his name, Midnight raised his head and looked directly toward the observation tower. Moments later, the stallion began making his way down toward the visitor center, where the children were now excitedly gathering. This had become his routine, greeting each new group of young visitors, allowing them to witness his majesty up close, creating memories and advocates that would protect his descendants for generations. "Ready for today's presentation?" Dr. Wright asked. Cooper nodded, feeling the familiar sense of purpose that had carried him through these remarkable years, always ready to share their story. As they descended to meet the students, Cooper reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with his darkest moment, abandoned and facing death. The Mustangs hadn't just saved his life, they had transformed it, giving it meaning beyond anything he could have imagined. In saving him, they had ultimately saved themselves and thousands of other wild horses across the American West. Cooper watched as midnight approached the odd children, standing at a perfect distance, close enough to inspire wonder, far enough to maintain his wild dignity. "This is what they were trying to show us all along," Cooper said softly, "that the boundaries we create between ourselves and the natural world exist only in our minds." As education, science, and policy continued to evolve around the Silver Creek model, the Mustangs remained what they had always been: wild, free, and now, finally, truly understood. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves stories about the extraordinary connections between humans and animals, and help us spread the message that compassion knows no species boundaries.